Right now, you may be far closer to your winning season than anything in your life is currently telling you. That is not a comforting line to open with. It is the actual claim of this video, and I'm going to show you the evidence for it. Because a winning season almost never announces itself as won. It arrives first as a specific, disorienting phase, a kind of interference running underneath an ordinary life that shows up right before a person crosses into something genuinely new. And almost everyone reads that phase as proof their life is quietly falling apart when it is the surest sign they are standing right at the doorway. That is the signal the title is pointing at, the one most people miss completely. They miss it because every tool you own for measuring whether your life is working was built to track something entirely different from what is actually moving inside you right now. Carl Jung, and very nearly every tradition that ever mapped how a human being actually changes, described this exact phase and gave it features, real ones that you can hold your own life up against and check, one by one. So here is what I am going to prove to you over the next 40 minutes. Every real signal sounds like static, right before it comes in clear. What you do in the next few weeks decides which way this goes. You either bury the signal back under the old noise and wait years for it to come around again, or you learn to sit still inside the static long enough to hear the first clear thing it is trying to say. So let me show you what it is, where it comes from, and exactly what to do while you are standing in the middle of it. Picture someone like Owen, not a real person, a composite, built out of a pattern that shows up so often, once you know to look for it, that you will probably recognize yourself somewhere inside him before I am done. Owen is in his mid-30s. He runs the night shift at a municipal water treatment plant. Nothing dramatic about any of it. No tragedy, no diagnosis, no single bad day you could point at and blame. That ordinariness is the whole point. Here is what started happening to him. He drives the same route home he has driven for 6 years, and one morning he arrives in his own driveway and cannot remember a single mile of the trip. Not in a frightening way, in a way that feels like he was somewhere else entirely for the whole 30 minutes. A few days later, a co-worker complains about the schedule. The same complaint Owen has heard 100 times, the kind that used to earn a shrug and a bit of mild irritation. And this time, something closer to grief moves through him instead, and he has no idea where it came from or why it is that big. And at night, he lies awake, running the math on a decision he is nowhere near ready to make. And slowly, he notices that the math itself has started to feel beside the point, like he is solving the wrong problem with all the right equations. Now here is the part that mattered, and it is the part Owen kept getting stuck on. He checked. He is not depressed in any way he can name. He is not imagining any of it. Nothing traumatic happened. Nothing is objectively wrong with his life. And that is exactly what made it so hard to name, because there was no event to hang it on, no story that explained it. Just a low, steady interference running underneath an ordinary life that was, on paper, completely fine. If any part of that sounded like your last few weeks, then listen closely, because you are not losing your grip. You are picking up the same static Owen was picking up, and by the end of this, you are going to know precisely what it means and precisely what it is asking you to do. This was never really a video about whether something is wrong with you. It is about a real, documented phase that arrives right before a genuine transition in a person's life, and about the strange fact that almost nothing in ordinary modern life teaches you to recognize that phase while you are standing inside it. Some nights the screen is the wrong place for this. If you'd rather just listen, Surreal Mind is on Spotify now. The words "In the Dark," wherever you are, links in the description. Because this phase produces no achievement, no announcement, and nothing you can hold up and show anyone. It stays invisible to almost every framework you have ever used to measure your own life. So here is a framework that actually was built to see it. Over 100 years ago, an anthropologist named Arnold van Gennep sat down and studied the ceremonies that cultures all over the world use to move a person from one stage of life into the next. Coming of age, marriage, becoming an elder. And underneath all of them, in every culture he examined, he found the same three-part shape. First, the person is separated from their old status. Then they pass through a strange middle zone, where they are no longer who they were, and not yet who they are becoming. And only then are they brought back in and given their new place. Decades later, another anthropologist, Victor Turner, gave that middle zone a name. He called it liminal, from the Latin word for a threshold, a doorway. And he described the people caught inside it as being, in his own phrase, betwixt and between, standing in the doorway, out of the old room, not yet in the new one, belonging fully to neither. And here is why that matters to you tonight. Turner was describing something so disorienting that human beings had to build entire ceremonies around it, just to walk each other through it without anyone getting lost. This was never some rare or exotic experience. It is common enough and hard enough that we invented ritual itself, partly to survive it. Jung came at the very same threshold from the opposite direction. Where the anthropologist stood outside and watched the ceremony, Jung worked from inside the mind of the person standing in the doorway, describing what it actually feels like in there while it is happening. And that is what I'm going to call, from here on, the threshold static, the interference you pick up while you are caught between two versions of your own life. Before I give you the 5 signs of it, you need one more piece, because it explains why this phase fools almost everyone. Jung noticed something about the way we live that makes this crossing nearly impossible to read correctly. We believe exclusively in doing, he wrote, and we do not ask about the doer, who is judged only by achievements that have collective value. Sit with that. Every scoreboard you have ever used on yourself measures output. Things done, things earned, things other people can see and count. But the threshold static produces none of that, because during it, the doer itself is being quietly rebuilt, and a thing under reconstruction cannot post results. So you check your usual instruments, you see nothing moving, and you conclude that you have stalled or broken. That misread has a name in this video. I am going to call it the false collapse reading. It is the near universal habit of looking at the one phase where your inner life is doing its most important work and seeing only failure, because the only meters you own were built for a different kind of progress entirely. Almost every one of the 5 signs gets misread this exact way, so let me hand you the correct reading of each. The first sign of the threshold static is that your old roles begin to feel like a costume instead of a self. The version of you that shows up for work still shows up. The one that shows up for your family, for the group chat, for the people who expect a particular you, still performs on cue. Everything still functions, but you are watching it now from a step behind your own eyes. The way a costume still fits perfectly well on the morning you realize it was never really yours. This is not burnout. Burnout is when the tank runs empty and you cannot do the thing anymore. Here the tank is fine. You can still do all of it. It is the person doing it who has quietly started to feel like a stranger wearing your name. And do not let anyone talk you into calling this ingratitude for a life that mostly still works, because that is the false collapse reading again, dressed up as a moral failing. It is the first, quietest signal that something underneath the rolls has begun to move. A roll you are outgrowing never announces itself. It just slowly starts costing more energy to wear each day. And that rising cost is what surfaces the next sign, the moment you can no longer distract yourself away from it. If a part of your normal week has started to feel like a costume you're only wearing, tell me in the comments. Type this, sign 1, right now. The second sign is that you start noticing the same thing coming at you from completely unconnected directions. Turner found this one in the liminal state too. People standing in that doorway consistently report a heightened sensitivity to symbol and to pattern. They start catching connections and echoes that their ordinary role-bound attention would have filtered straight out and never registered. A phrase you have never once paid attention to suddenly shows up in 3 unrelated places in a single week. A stranger says, almost word for word, the exact sentence you have been avoiding saying to yourself. A song, a line in a book, an offhand comment from someone who could not possibly know, all of it seeming to point the same direction. Now hear me carefully, because this is where people go off the rails. This is not the universe sending you personalized telegrams. It is something quieter, and honestly stranger than that. It is what a mind starts doing the moment it stops organizing everything around its old, fixed roles. The filter loosens. You begin seeing what was always sitting right there in front of you. That heightened noticing feels significant, because it genuinely is significant. It means the reorganization has already begun underneath you. But for most viewers, the noticing gives way to something else entirely. It goes quiet. If any of this is putting language to something you have been carrying for weeks without being able to name it, subscribe. Naming this exact kind of in-between season, the one no one around you seems to have a word for, is the whole reason this channel exists. The third sign is the quiet, and it is the one that frightens people most, because from the outside it can look exactly like depression, and from the inside it can feel like nothing at all. Jung spent decades of his life studying medieval alchemy, not because he believed anyone could turn lead into gold, but because he became convinced those old alchemists had been secretly describing the stages of psychological transformation in code, dressed up as chemistry. And in text after text, he kept finding the same first stage. The alchemists called it the nigredo, the blackening. In his book, Mysterium Conjunctionis, here is how Jung described what it actually is. Confrontation with the shadow, he wrote, produces at first a dead balance, a standstill that hampers moral decisions and makes convictions ineffective or even impossible. Everything becomes doubtful. That, he said, is why the alchemists named this stage the nigredo, the darkness, the chaos, the melancholy. Sit with that phrase for a second. A dead balance, a standstill. That is the quiet you may be sitting in right now, wondering what is wrong with you. And here is the correct reading of it, the one Jung spent his life arriving at. It is a standstill that comes right before the transformation, not instead of it. The stillness you are so afraid of is the sound of the machine changing gears. Which sign is loudest for you right now? The costume, the noticing, or the quiet? Just comment the number, 1, 2, or 3, so the rest of us can see we are not the only ones standing here. The fourth sign is that old fears come back louder, and this is the one people are most certain must mean they are sliding backward. That same alchemical material Jung spent his life on describes the nigredo as the darkest point of the entire process. The hard part itself, arriving in the middle of the work rather than at the start of it. Fears you were sure you had already handled, already processed, already left behind, come back. And they come back stronger, And it feels like every bit of ground you gained has just been quietly erased overnight. But here is what is actually happening under the surface, and it runs almost exactly counter to how it feels. The psychic structure that used to keep those fears managed and buried is the precise thing being taken apart and rebuilt right now. So the fear surfaces for one simple reason. The lid that used to sit on top of it has finally been lifted off. What feels like everything caving in is the container opening on purpose, so that what was sealed inside can finally be dealt with in the open. And if the fear is loud for you tonight, stay with me, because there is one more sign, and it is the strangest of the 5. The 5th sign is that time itself stops behaving normally. Turner noticed this about the liminal state as well. He said that inside the threshold, the ordinary structures of a person's world become, in his words, temporarily suspended. The invisible rules that normally tell you who you are and where you are and when you are all go quiet at once. And the inside version of that is something so many people in this phase describe. Days that blur into one identical day you could not tell apart. Whole weeks that simply vanish, that you could not account for afterward if someone asked you to. Or the exact reverse of that. A single ordinary Tuesday that somehow takes up more room inside you than the entire month before it did. The clock you always used to measure your own progress against, the one that told you whether you were on schedule or falling behind everyone else, has stopped being a reliable instrument. And that is the false collapse reading waiting to catch you one more time, because it feels like your life has stalled out. What is really happening is that the structure being suspended is partly the very one that used to keep your sense of time running straight. So there are the 5, the costume, the noticing, the quiet, the fear, and time coming loose. Now here is where it gets genuinely dangerous, because recognizing the signs is not the same as knowing what to do with them. And there are 3 specific ways people take this phase and make it far worse than it ever needed to be. The first danger is rushing to make the discomfort stop by any means available. A new hobby, a new relationship, a new city, a new distraction, anything at all to make the static go away faster. This treats the interference itself as the problem to be solved, when the interference is a real and temporary phase that needs to be allowed to run its course to the end. Reach for the off switch too early, and you cut the signal off in the exact moment before it would have come in clear. You end the crossing without ever completing it, and you keep the old life by default, not by choice. The second danger is deciding, because nobody around you can see any of this happening, that you must be the only person it has ever happened to. This is where the isolation the threshold already creates gets so much heavier. You go quiet about it. You stop mentioning it, because how would you even begin to describe it? And to whom, without sounding like you are falling apart? And that silence slowly convinces you that you are uniquely broken. You are not. You are standing in one of the oldest and most thoroughly mapped transitions human beings have ever recorded. You were never alone in it. You were just taught to hide it and carry it by yourself. The third danger is the most serious of the 3, and it is this. Because there is no visible proof yet that anything is changing, you decide that this flat, static-filled state is simply who you are now, permanently. You stop treating it as a season you are passing through and start wearing it as an identity you have settled into. And Van Gennep's own research is blunt about why that is a trap. The threshold phase is defined by the fact that it is meant to resolve into something else on the far side. That is exactly what makes it a threshold rather than a room. A person absolutely can get frozen in the doorway for years, but that is a failure to finish crossing. It is not evidence there was never another side to reach. If that second danger is exactly where you have been living lately, quietly convinced no one else could possibly understand this, then comment and say so. You will watch in real time how many strangers answer you. And there is a specific reason some people cross this threshold in a single season, while others get stuck standing in the doorway for a decade, endlessly broadcasting the fact that they are transforming instead of ever actually finishing. That is its own video, and it is linked at the end of this one. So if the signs are real and the dangers are real, the obvious question is what you are actually supposed to do while you are standing inside it. Here is the practice. I am going to call it the tuning practice, and it has 3 phases because tuning a signal was never about forcing the station to appear on command. It was always about holding still on the right frequency long enough to let the station arrive on its own. Phase 1. Name the one thing that no longer fits, and then leave it there, unreplaced. This is the actual do it tonight instruction, so take it literally. Write down one specific role or routine or expectation that has started to feel like a costume on you. Just one. And then, and this is the genuinely hard part, do not immediately assign yourself a shiny new one to fill the gap it leaves. Do not solve it. Almost everyone skips this phase entirely and jumps straight to redecorating because an empty space is uncomfortable to stand in and a freshly labeled space feels like progress. Naming what no longer fits and then tolerating the blank where it used to be without rushing to fill it is the entire first move. The blank is not the enemy. The blank is the workspace. Phase 2. Let the static run without answering it. Give yourself a real fixed window, a few weeks at the absolute minimum. Not a single bad night, and not a single dramatic afternoon. And inside that window, you commit to making no major, irreversible decision while the loudest signs are still active and roaring. This is deliberate restraint, and it is the exact discipline the old rites of passage used to enforce for people, structurally, from the outside, that modern life no longer builds in for anyone at all. And this is precisely what Jung found, sitting at the very center of successful transformation. He spent years studying an ancient Chinese meditation text, and afterward, he wrote about what the people who actually came through the change had done. As far as I could see, he wrote, they did nothing but let things happen. The art of letting things happen, action through non-action, letting go of oneself, became for me the key that opens the door to the way. We must be able to let things happen in the psyche. That is phase 2, in his own exact words. And notice that he calls it an art, something you actively practice and get better at. It is the deliberate, almost muscular skill of not interfering while something in you quietly finds its own true shape. Phase 3. Listen for the first clear phrase, not the whole broadcast at once. A threshold does not resolve all in one moment, the same way a radio signal does not snap straight from pure noise into a full symphony. One clear line comes through first, while everything around it is still fuzzy and uncertain. One moment of unexpected certainty about one small thing. So here is the move. Keep a running log and call it the static log. Every single time one of those small moments of clarity arrives, a decision that suddenly feels obvious, a thing you now know for certain you are done with, a direction that quietly stops being a question. You write down when it came and what it was. You do not wait to feel completely arrived before you start trusting the signal. You collect the clear phrases one at a time in writing, and you let them accumulate slowly into the whole message. Now watch what that very same static does in 2 different lives, because this is where it becomes plain that the phase itself does not decide the outcome. What you do inside it does. Take someone like Denise, another composite, an insurance claims adjuster in her mid-40s, and she hit the exact same static that Owen did. The costume feeling, the quiet, time coming loose from its shape. And Denise did precisely what the first danger describes. She could not stand the discomfort of a static she was unable to explain to anyone who asked, so she turned it into something visible as fast as she could. She quit her job and she moved to a brand new city, all inside about 2 months. She needed the interference to become an event, something with a clear story attached that other people could nod along to and understand. And for a while it worked, the way a total change of scenery always works for a little while. Then, roughly 18 months later, the same static came back. In the new city, in the new job, surrounded by the new furniture, because she had picked up the entire radio and carried it somewhere else, without ever once holding still long enough to tune it. She changed the location of the signal. She never actually received what it was sending. Now go back to Owen. Owen ran the tuning practice, more or less by instinct, without ever knowing it had a name. He named the parts of his life that had started to feel like a costume, and he sat inside that discomfort without immediately quitting anything or blowing anything up. He gave it a real stretch of weeks instead of one dramatic overnight decision, and he kept his own rough version of the static log, quietly noting the small moments when one thing at a time got clear. He did not detonate his life. He kept the job, kept the routines, kept the people in it. What changed happened underneath all of that, out of view, and after a few months the static resolved, entirely on its own schedule, into a single specific and genuinely different choice about how he wanted to spend the next stretch of his life. It was the very same static that had sent Denise packing across the country. Everything that came after it came down to what each of them did while they were standing inside it. And it is worth saying plainly that Jung was not describing any of this from a safe, clinical distance. He spent the better part of 40 years working through this exact material, and he did it in large part because he recognized the pattern first in his own inner life, and only later mapped it in his patients. This was his own doorway before it was ever a theory. Which brings up the part almost nobody prepares you for: who you actually need standing near you while you are inside it. Because the wrong company will pull you back out of the doorway before you have finished crossing, and the right company will hold the space open just long enough for you to make it through. There are 3 kinds of people who are safe to be near while you are in your own static. The first kind are the people who do not need you to have already arrived at a finished, updated version of yourself in order to keep treating you like you. They are not standing there waiting for the new model to ship. They are completely fine with the one that is still in progress. The second kind are the people who have been through their own threshold and who therefore know, in their bones, better than to rush you out of yours. They have felt the doorway from the inside. They will sit beside you in it instead of standing behind you and shoving. And the third kind are the people who can hear you say, "I genuinely do not know yet," and let that sentence just hang in the air without needing you to resolve it for their comfort, who do not require you to have an answer so that they can feel at ease. Here is a practical way to tell a relationship that is genuinely straining under this, apart from one that is only recalibrating around the new you. The straining ones demand that you snap back to the old, certain, finished version of yourself and get quietly frustrated when you cannot. The recalibrating ones simply adjust to the fact that you are carrying less certainty than you used to right now, and they stay anyway. And notice the pull while you are in this phase, to explain yourself to people in far more finished and confident language than you actually have available, purely to keep them comfortable. Resist that pull. This is exactly what the static log is for. It gives you something real and specific to point at when someone asks how you are doing, instead of forcing you to narrate the whole shapeless thing from memory and accidentally making it sound far more resolved than it actually is. You can just show them the last clear line that came through the noise. Now, 3 ways people misuse the tuning practice itself, because even the right practice has its own failure modes, and you should see all 3 coming before they reach you. The first is turning "I am in my threshold" into a permanent, all-purpose excuse, using a real and temporary phase as cover to avoid re-engaging with responsibilities that were never actually part of the static in the first place. The threshold is real. It is not a doctor's note that covers everything in your life you would rather not deal with. The second is the one I want you watching for most closely, and I am going to call it signal boosting. It is the urge to announce the transformation, loudly and publicly, before it has actually finished happening inside you. To turn the raw static into content, to perform the crossing for an audience while you are still only halfway through the doorway. And Jung, of all people, left a startlingly direct warning about exactly this temptation. In the Red Book, the private journal where he worked through his own deepest material, he wrote a line that reads almost like an instruction for this precise moment. "Conceal the God that you have taken with you," he wrote. "Let them rave and maul each other. Do not speak and do not show the God, but sit in a solitary place. Whatever is genuinely being born in you during this phase needs privacy to finish forming. Broadcast it too early, chasing the reactions, and you quietly trade the actual transformation for applause about a transformation that has not even happened yet." It is the very same reason he gave in a letter years later for having sat on some of his own most important discoveries for a full 17 years before publishing a word. He wanted to protect them, he wrote, from the regrettable but undeniable imitative instinct of the public. A thing announced too soon gets shaped by the crowd's response to it, instead of by its own real nature. And the third misuse is using your own passage through this to feel quietly superior to the people still lost in their static, treating your threshold like a diploma you earned, like proof that you have graduated past everyone who has not crossed one yet. The doorway is not a ranking, and it never was. Everyone gets their own eventually, and yours arriving first does not place you above a person standing in theirs. If you have ever caught yourself about to turn your own quiet season into a performance before it was even finished, be honest and comment. Say this: "I almost turned my own quiet season into content before it was even finished." Now pull all the way back for a second and look at this whole thing from above, because there is a reason this phase feels so uniquely, crushingly lonely, and the reason is not personal to you at all. Nearly every culture Van Gennep ever studied built a real container for exactly this crossing. Elders who had already been through it and could name it for you. Initiation rites that marked the entrance so you knew you had stepped in. And most importantly of all, a structured, witnessed return to the community waiting on the other side, so that no one ever had to make the passage alone or come back to no one noticing. Modern life has quietly stripped nearly all of that away. The same ancient, universal, thoroughly documented phase now happens to people with no elder assigned to notice it and no ceremony at all to mark its end. So it gets experienced as private failure, as something uniquely and shamefully wrong with you, when it is in truth one of the oldest and most recognized crossings a human being can possibly make. You are making that crossing in a culture that quietly stripped away every ritual that used to name it. That absence is the whole reason it can feel like something uniquely wrong with you. So, come back to Owen one last time and let me close the loop that opened all of this. Owen's static never meant his life was breaking. It meant that something in him had finally started reorganizing itself around whatever was coming next. And the only reason it felt like collapse, the single only reason, was that nothing he owned had ever been built to read it as anything else. His instruments were all still calibrated for the old life. The new one simply did not register on them yet. And if you are standing in it right now, the costume feeling, the noticing coming from everywhere, the quiet that scares you in the dark, the old fear that somehow got louder instead of softer, the days that will not hold their shape, none of that is proof that something is wrong with you. It is the single most documented, most cross-culturally recognized crossing in the entire human record of how people actually change into who they are becoming. Almost nobody ever just sat you down and told you what it was called. So consider yourself sat down. Now you know. So hold on to the one line this entire thing was built around, because it is the reading that turns all 5 signs from a breakdown into a beginning. Every real signal sounds like static right before it comes in clear. One last thing, and then I will let you go. Of the 5 signs, name the one that is loudest in you this week. The costume, the roles that stopped fitting, the noticing, the same thing arriving from everywhere at once. The quiet, the standstill that scares you. The fear that came back louder than before. Or time, coming loose from its normal shape. Whichever one you just felt lands somewhere in your chest, drop it in the comments, so the next person scrolling past sees they are not the only one standing in this doorway. And if naming this helped you tonight, there is a great deal more of it waiting for you right here. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.